cast your mind back, if you were here a year ago at AV4, what is interesting is that you realize how prescient our coverage of the whole climate change debate was. And a year ago, Mr. David Bellamy, who is also our speaker for this evening, stood on this stage and basically explained exactly why the whole global warming scenario is severely flawed. And of course, now look what's happened since. It's gone global. At least now there is a debate. And if you've ever read the ClimateGate emails, if you haven't read them rather, go and read them because they are incredibly damning. There is no question that there is a manipulation or at least a withholding of data going on. And so if you want to read that later on, and you've got a few minutes, do come and peruse some of the small print here because it is fascinating. So what David did a year ago has now taken on even more gravity. And we've already heard about the climate from Johnny last night, Manjir this afternoon, Peter tomorrow morning. Do not miss it because that follows on very neatly from what you're going to hear now. But of course, you all know who David Bellamy is. David Bellamy has been a fantastic TV presenter, a naturalist for many years, respected, until he started talking about the climate, questioning the official line. You're not meant to do that, or you weren't meant to do that. Now, suddenly, David is finding himself in, shall we say, more in the limelight for this very reason, that he has been brave enough to stick his head above the parapet, and now people are beginning to want to hear it. Hooray! Yes? Absolutely. So the time has come. We can't say necessarily for certain what's going on with the climate, but we can say there is absolutely a debate to be had. And David Bellamy has been a brave soldier for that. He's here to share with us his latest views on it. And if you didn't hear him a year ago, don't worry, he's going to fill you in on the whole story of his views on the climate. So please give a massive welcome to David Bellamy.
We've all heard about ClimateGate. It's been brewing for 30 years, and there is all the relevant data of how it brewed up and then spilled over. And it annoyed a lot of people, starting with the BBC and ending up all those people that I used to call green a long, long time ago, who we were trying to stop the world, this wonderful, vibrant world, from being smashed up. And now the time of retribution has actually come. Now, I hope you like my picture on the back. She's on the back. I'll tell you why in a minute. But I'm still learning back in the, 30 years ago, when there weren't too many fat kids on the block, and kids went and played in the parks, and they were healthy and they were happy, and there weren't that many of those allergies we had. And it changed really mainly in that 30 years. So if you want to read the whole story, there it is. I will now try and fit the pieces together. And I'm going to step back, and although I'm using PowerPoint, I really don't like them very much. So I'm going to, when I start, not yet, I'm going to say, next slide, you see. So that is when we get going. I'm going to stick to my notes. It's a very, very complicated story I'm going to tell you, but it all ends up with, yes, the gate will open. Now, in mid-August 2000, right in the middle of the BBC's and the Met Office's promised barbecue summer, do you remember we had it last year? Or we didn't have it last year. The University of East Anglia's climate research unit crew disclosed that they had destroyed the data for its global surface temperature data. And they said, and they alleged it for doing that because they didn't have enough computer storage space to leave it on. Now, the crew data has been the basis for several of the major international studies that claim that the burning of fossil fuels is the cause of global warming crisis. Crew's destruction of data severely undercuts the credibility of those studies and of that university. So draw your own conclusions, sabotage or desperation. They know, I don't think I do. A gory tale of the first carbon neutral billionaire. He's made vast amount of money and still is making vast amount of money because of that hockey stick. And there, me, when I was a bit younger, 1969 and 1996, I was him on telly. The BBC's Adult and Continuing Education Department, closely followed by ITV, gave me free global range to inform the world about botany, natural history and the environment. My popularity on TV brought me very many accolades. Now that is the front of Nature, and I was only the second person in the world to have his picture on the front of that wonderful, well it was wonderful in those days, magazine. And I was doing a program, Bellamy on botany, and it was called Carrying On Cutting. And if you see there I am with a lawnmower and a young lady with a grass skirt, and it was called Carry On Cutting. And this actually got lots and lots of accolades on the front of Nature. The only other person who'd had it up that time, until that time, was Charles Darwin. So I must have been looked upon pretty well by the whole of the scientific world. The caption on it was Science is Fun. And here are just some of the papers, or the scientific papers, which I wrote and were published in this amazing the occurrence of Shinus nigrescens. This was written on my honeymoon, actually, in the west of Ireland, and was all about the fact of pollution and not carbon dioxide from the air changes the vegetation as you move across the whole of Europe. The effects of pollution from the Torrey Canyon. I had just, with my team, had just finished a survey, an underwater survey in Cornwall. Down went that enormous ship, plastered oil all over the place and left us in a real mess. But it wasn't too much of a mess. It only got in a mess when they put detergent down there, and then they turned the oil into a terrible, terrible mess, which started killing all the animals. Yes, lots of birds, of course, were killed, but the other animals were not affected unless we did stupid things like putting the detergent and trying to wash it away. The use of the term base rich, this is about acidity. And we're hearing so much about all the seas are going acid. That is a total and utter codswallop, because when the first corals began to live, the actual acidity of the sea wasn't much different now, but it can't actually go acid. It is a logarithmic relationship. And so I could go on. The application of the second law of thermodynamics I mean, it actually shows that once the Big Bang had settled down, then evolution had to happen. And just as it don't, because all the bits and pieces fit together like a giant Lego or like a mini Lego kit, and it can't go anywhere else. Terrain, traffic and tundra. I studied up in the Arctic slope, and I have seen the melting of not just the ice cap, but of course of the permafrost and sublittoral reef phenomena at Aldabra. I spent a wonderful time with the military actually diving in some of the most amazing parts of the world, and we do understand an awful lot about the tenacity of the sea, and the main problem is when we start throwing all sorts of eutrophians into the sea, and then we get problems. I was also offered many positions as trustee, president, vice president and patron by conservation, environmental and social organisations. And starting with WWF. WWF has just perpetrated the latest gate, the Panda Gate, and I will come back to the end. The Youth Hostel Association, for 20 years I was their president. The Wildlife Trust, I helped set up 6 of those, but I had to read in the newspaper that they'd thrown me out. They didn't have the guts to actually tell me. I read it in the paper because I believed in global warming. No, I didn't. I didn't believe in global warming. The BTCV still goes strong, 52 years down the thing, and I'm still actually working them. Plant Life, I founded that myself. Again, they had to let the press know that they had thrown me out. They didn't have the guts. And I'd worked with some of these things for 52 years of my life because I believed in what they were doing. Marine Conservation Society going strong. Coral Key taking out, I think it's our 52,000th youngster, kid to go and diving and do research in the seas around the world, and many of others. But then the rot set in. 2 colleagues, Julian Pettifer and Robin Page, were publicly sacked by the BBC. And they were publicly sacked, and they were on television almost as I were back in that days. And in essence, they were sacked because they could no longer be viewed as non-biased in their opinions. And why should they have been thrown out for doing that? I can only, well, at that point, I could only take it in that I also fell into that category, because from that moment on, my career on TV came to an abrupt end, and it was really abrupt. Now, I don't like these things, and I've been campaigning against these things for a long time. And I was doing a lot of work with Blue Peter in those days. And I actually had my first pop music launched on Blue Peter. It was called Brontosaurus, Wait For Me. I didn't bring a copy because it was horrendous, but it got to 54 in the charts, and I was rather, oh, Brontosaurus, won't you wait for me? And I've still got a copy, and wherever I go to schools, I always play the damn thing as I go in. So one of my last appearances on Blue Peter was soon after Neil Kinnock, remember Neil Kinnock, had successfully campaigned against the building of a so-called wind farm, thus despoiling his beloved green Welsh countries. And the things are popping up all the time. And with the way the government is pouring our taxpayers' money in to put the things up, because they don't work at all, they have to be backed up the whole time, and they kill birds and bats, and they don't really help the people. And please, if you're faced with one of these things, join the local club and get them closed down. I think I've helped 47 different wind farms not happen. But of course they're coming back and back because the amount of our money that we're chucking into these things is absolutely horrendous. So when invited to discuss wind farms on the programme with a group of Welsh children whose farm was threatened with the same problem as Kinnock's constituents had, I did my best to be non-partisan, because that we did back in those days. Despite that, I'm afraid I was berated by listeners for being too pro-wind. And if you see what's happening now in Wales with well, for I think it was 18 years, I was the chairman of a thing called the Welsh Festival of the Countryside. They didn't even bother to tell me that I'd been thrown out. In fact, I think they threw themselves out at the end because it didn't actually work. But this really was the end. And since that time onwards, anyone who has stuck their heads above the anti-wind or anti-global warming line have been subject to vilification. And it is pretty bad when you are told that you are the Holocaust denier, or you're worse than the bloke who locked his daughter up and raped her for 25 years. And those things were floating about all this time. And I think the worst of all, I was invited by the Australian government to go back to celebrate 25th anniversary of the celebration of me being put in prison there. And we actually stopped a very, very beautiful white water river from being impounded to make electricity. And when I said, well, why should I come? You put me in solitary confinement, and the food was awful, so I was on hunger strike, so why should I come back? And they said, come on. Well, you helped turn the tide in conservation in Australia. I didn't. They had some of the best conservationists in the world at that point, but I went back. When I got there, there had been 2,500 picket lines, greenies with me on the picket line, and 1,000 were there on that night, and not a single one would speak to me because I didn't believe in global warming. It's a canker which has gone all the way round the world. And, I could tell you stories after stories about this vilification, but I did play rugby, you can see for me, and I enjoy a punch-up. Thank God I had, because it's been a lot of great fun. Well, that's not me, but enough about me at this point. Down to the proof that there is no evidence of carbon dioxide being either a poison or that it could cause warming Armageddon. There isn't, and we are feeding our children all tonight. You're all going to die of global warming. There's nothing we can do about it. We don't have to say things like that to kids. We live in a wonderful, wonderful world, and it can look after itself. So, but you have to put up with this rubbish. And of course, this real evidence is nitty-gritty of real science, peer-reviewed over the past 232 years, thanks to Isaac Newton's Principia. And everything in the Principia, once you've translated it from Latin, you will find gives no evidence that carbon dioxide is either a poison or is going to cause meltdown. So, back to another very famous front page picture, and there she is. Even at 77 years of age, when I see this picture, my temperature goes up, followed by the amount of carbon dioxide I exhale. Never the other way round. Temperature, and that's all the proof you actually need. And if you say it's no proof at all, then look at the ice cores. Now, thanks to the study of a series of ice cores, this appears to be an inconvenient truth for the hordes of the global warmers, because it says exactly the same thing. And we know this from the ice cores. We can pull the ice cores up, we can see how much CO2 was actually locked up in them, and then you'll see the temperature all goes up, followed by the amount of CO2. And there is the ice core. Al Gore tried to make the world real hot by using ice core data to say that because there was a correlation between the atmospheric CO2 levels and the world's average temperature, CO2 made the temperature of the world rise, threatening life on children, on this earth, and aimed very, very much at children. Please note that one Ed Miliband was so taken by the Gore hype that he made sure that our schools got 3 copies of the Shockaholic tape, and it was absolute rubbish. Thanks to the vigilance of a school governor who actually was a lorry driver, who didn't want his young family exposed to the dogma, the evidence was taken before the High Court, before a High Court judge in England. And he ruled that this horrible tape could not be shown in our schools unless the other side of the argument was robustly covered. The trouble was that it appears that most teachers were not informed of the Miliband let-out clause. And theoretically, if they had gone, they could have been put in prison. But who were actually told? Did you hear about it if you were a teacher? Most of the teachers, well, all the teachers I knew had not heard it, so we soon let them know about it. Now, here we are to parade the other side of the argument. Here's real data from the much celebrated Vostok ice core. Then, at this point, some of the deepest we've got, so it took us back into the history. Up goes the temperature. You see the temperature line is the blue one. Up goes the temperature, followed after quite a long time by the amount of CO2 that comes out. So this completely contradicts Al Gore's claims, and it started bringing trouble back to him back at that point. Also, troubles ahead for the warmers camp, especially when independent researchers showed that crucially important pieces of the warmers' evidence were based on statistical analysis that were totally false. We've all heard about GIGO, garbage in, garbage out to your thing, but this is actually fiddling the garbage while it's inside the machine. Indeed, the Al Gore rhythms, if I may call it that, with which he belaboured the unacceptable media and frightened the public were inexorably bent. He might have had a bent hockey stick, but everything he did with it was bent. The IPCC, the International Pantomime of Climate Change, took the easy way out, silently dropping any reference to the bent hockey stick from their reports. Reports, remember, and this is the most amazing bit in the story, reports that had helped him, help give Gore an Oscar and a Nobel Prize. Now, how did the Nobel Prize people ever make such a terrible mistake? Or if you look back into the thing about Nobel Prize, they've made some pretty funny decisions in the past. But, of course, those reports, Al Gore was very, very kind because he said all the people who'd worked, 2,000 plus people who worked with him and said these things, they all shared the Nobel Prize. And that is one of those smart bits of marketeering, because from that point onwards, all those 2,000 scientists had their work stamped by a Nobel laureate. That was pretty bad, because everyone said, oh, well, he's got this wonderful award, so he must be telling the truth. So to unravel this, let's take a look at historical evidence from the last 1,000 years. There is the medieval warm period. There is when the Vikings colonized Greenland, because the edges of Greenland had turned green, and they could raise crops and they could raise animals up there. And of course, as the medieval warm period came to an end, they all died because they couldn't get back to Viking land to find a home again. And you can go there and see the houses they built and the cathedral they built when they were out there. So up goes the temperature, and then down goes the temperature, and killed all those Vikings off, and we went into the Little Ice Age, which killed a lot more people off, mainly with malaria. Yes, malaria was endemic in Europe and right up into the areas of Russia. And Al Gore kept telling us, oh, if the temperature goes up, we're all going to die of malaria. He got his facts absolutely wrong. And so it was a malaria gate. We didn't talk about it at that point. And then the river Thames froze over. And it has partly frozen over quite a number of times. And so we have got the... So we now that there is a medieval, I'm not drunk, I'm just tired, warm period, not just in Europe, but around the world. And please note that a few centuries before that, it was warm enough for the Romans to produce red wine on the borders of Scotland. So it must have been a lot warmer at that point. And remember, all Al Gore did was take his start of his graph wherever he wanted to, and up it went. And that fooled an awful lot of different people. The global warmers did their best to hide this inconvenient truth, and they tried real hard. In 2006, Dr. David Deeming of the University of Oklahoma gave testimony to the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. After he'd published a paper on borehole temperatures based on historical data in the journal Science, another big player in science, he received an email from a major researcher in the area of climate change which said, we have got to get rid of the medieval warming because it gets in the way of our dogma. In 1999, Michael Mann, one of the divas of global warming, and his colleagues did that. They published a reconstruction of past temperatures from AD 1000 to the present, in which the medieval warm period simply disappeared. And all these people, oh, wonderful, it's gone. Yeah, no, the hockey stick is right, it goes up, and I'd like to really stick it somewhere. Model flags were waved aloft, and the media joined in. All the papers were full of this new disappeared medieval warm pointer. So now let's check the evidence over the past over the past 5,000 years. There have been 3 warm periods, the green sections on the map, when it was warmer, much warmer than it is today, and the Earth survived through all those heating. So why shouldn't it go on? And you can see what's happened at the end. Up goes, but it hasn't come down below any of these other warm points. And for the last 12 years, the temperature has been going down pretty rapidly. Conclusion, climate change is natural and warmer periods occur without human CO2 emissions being the cause. And here we are, evidence from the last 150 years. From 1870 to 1915, fossil fuel use was pretty flat and the temperature went down, not up. From 1915 to 1914, fossil fuel use was flat and the temperature went up. From 1940 to 1975, fossil fuel use went up and the temperature went down. And the warmers are saying, oh, well, that's actually natural, you know, of course it has to do that. These world headlines warned that the end was nigh, thanks to an imminently catastrophic ice age round the corner. This was in 1973. We were being warned that we are going to freeze to death. And there were many weird and wonderful ideas about how to warm us up again and stop us from all dying. And one of the bright ideas was cover the ice caps with soot, which is the nearest thing to burning coal, if you actually think about it. We must remember in 1947, when the Queen got married, we had the hottest summer ever on record, and we had the coldest winter on record. And I spent my weekends in my dad's shop in Cheam in Surrey, and he was a pharmacist, and we were doing up ankles and legs and all things that people had broken falling over on the streets of London because they were all in ice and pretty deep in ice. And perhaps then there was also memories of the smog disaster of 1952. Yes, that was the last big smog in London because we came to our senses and stopped burning coal in open graves. But it was the days of toxic darkness, and 18,000 people died in London over one weekend. And we forget that. I can remember going to the pictures, and we got our money given back because they couldn't project the picture down through the smog in the cinema. And we had to walk home from one street lamp to another, else we couldn't found, and that was back in 1952. Then, if we look between 1975 and 1998, fossil fuel went up and temperature went up, and this is global warming, here comes the hockey stick, by 0.7 of 1 degree Celsius. That's peanuts, absolutely peanuts, but that's what they've been talking about the whole time. So a new coven of gloomsters, including some of the original ones who were saying we are all going to die in the freezer. These are sandwich board scientists, and they came up with the idea of anthropogenic global warming. Just like that. And that's what, it was just like that. I hadn't thought about it at all. It was, again, a load of rubbish. Think of all those taxes, think of all those taxes and the tax people which were going to fleece us to overcome a problem which doesn't actually exist and never did. Now let's look at what happened over the last decade. World temperature falling as CO2 rises. That's real data. That's not a hypothetical hockey stick at all. And up goes the CO2, and look what's happened to the whole thing temperature-wise. World temperature falling as CO2 rises. With horror of horrors, China and India waiting in the wings with overflowing coal buckets. And we, at that time, I think we still are paying for those coal-fired power stations in China to be built. And at the same time, we were talking about the Gore rubbish. And the conclusion, increases in CO2 rarely coincide with the rises in the Earth's temperature. Any correlation is therefore coincidental. At this juncture, the warmers began to see the light of the skeptics' train rushing down their tunnel of hype. Those with most to lose began to drop the term global warming, replacing it with climate change, which of course has been going on since the first living thing was up there or down there to actually record the fact. And they got out, they just said, oh, not global warming, we'll call it climate change. And climate change, I did research on climate change. It's real, it's been happening the whole time. I have to, and I did on many television programs, put my hand down into the peat and bring out a peat piece of it and eat something and say, in there is the record of the changes of temperature. And they forgot all that. No, you can't. You say things like that. And in this way, they gave themselves a spurious license to carry on frightening law-abiding citizens and their children. And that really, kids now, when they're doing their O-level things, there are tick boxes. And and the question says, which is the most important greenhouse gas, and they have to tick CO2, which is total and utter lies, because the main greenhouse gas happens to be water vapor. And any man or woman taking their dog out at night, if it's a clear night, then it's cold. If it's an overcast night, it is warm, because the water actually holds the temperature in. And so we have got the warmers coming along with wonderful clutching at waterlogged stores and talking about unprovable tipping points just around the corner, and they're going to kill our kids, and there's nothing we can do. Why tell if it's that true? Meanwhile, and I used to read this, this is the newspaper of NERC, the Natural Environmental Research Council, and they kept changing their mind, so I have to remind myself. It's a populist publication called Planet Earth. And I used to look at that, it was great, you could keep yourself up. All of a sudden, in comes the global warming. And so they had to do something. So they'd gone through the climate change, and then they thought, that's still a bit troublesome because we can't prove it happens. So we'll blame everything on environmental change. And here, the other side of my T-shirt. This is just one set of information which shows what really causes the temperature to change. And the number of, as soon as we get lots and lots of volcanoes, if they put dust in the air, down goes the temperature. So we have the very warm period, 1100 BC, and then down it comes, back up it goes, down it goes, back up, and you see where it's got to, and for the last 12 years it's been going down pretty sharply in those terms, about 0.7 degrees centigrade. And that's it. So carbon dioxide, no problems at all. And we've got to get that over to the whole of the public, and especially to our schools and our school teachers who have to say these things because they are in the now dogma in our schools. Now just look at what's happening to our warming oceans. We're always being told the temperature of the oceans are going up. Yeah, if you make the data up. But if you look at the rail, and it's going down, and pretty slightly. And again, every day or every week you read something in the papers which say it's getting warmer, and basically it is getting colder. And of course, this is not predicted by legions of models which put out these funny bits of, well, I don't like calling them lies because they don't like being called liars. And here a complicated set. No wonder that since 2007, the Arctic ice cap is increasing in area back towards the normal. Again, this is opposite to the hordes of predictions that made the headlines in the media. And we must also note that the Northwest Passage has been navigable on a number of occasions since 1850. 1850 was the beginning, the end of the Little Ice Age. And of course, if you take your baseline, up it goes, there is your hockey stick. But since then, on at least 5 occasions, you've been to sail your boat up into almost round the top of the world. And last year we had one, and all the women went, whoa, Bellamy's an idiot. You know, here is the proof that it's morning. But this time, they used to do it in little sailing boats around about 1850, and you could get through sometimes when the wind had blown the ice in the wrong way and opened it up. And this time we had to have ice-hardened they were boats or ships which had ice-hardened decks and things, and they also had nuclear icebreakers along to make sure they get through. So again, fiddle, or fustication, no truth in the whole thing. Now, despite the fact that the Royal Society published a paper that says that the radiation from the sun has little effect on Earth's temperature, we are already into 2 years into a cooling phase, which all belongs to the 24th sun cycle. And in the first 2 years of this cycle, there have been no or very, very few sunspots. And sunspots stir the whole thing up, and we've seen those wonderful pictures taken on telescopes with plasma roaring out and causing all sorts of problems with our telescope, but especially by our ways of listening to each other across the thing. Now, the last time this actually happened, the Earth entered into a cooler cycle, and there is ample peer-reviewed data backing up the anti-warmers' opinion. Sun cycles, and we are heading, if this goes on, in fact, right at this moment, the last time this happened, we went into a period of really cold thing, and it lasted throughout 30 years. So it looks now as it's going to get cooler, and then in about 15 years starting to get warmer. And that really is a problem, because as we've seen over these last 3 winters, which have been pretty wet and pretty cold, it doesn't do our plants, and it doesn't do our crops very, very much good. So get your long johns on and start planting the right thing. Now, I like this picture. I worked in the 34 years ago in the high Arctic. I went to the North Pole and landed on the ice there. And at that point, we had all sorts of problems with polar bears, because they would come in and eat anything in any of the houses. And you don't mess about with and here's one who is friend with the local husky dog. And they used to share their food, these two. But if one got too bad, then they would be tranquilized, or we'd take them way up and dump them. And 3 days later, they'd be back again because there was more food. In fact, some have had to be culled in the past. Now, the inconvenient truth for Al Gore, and he told some real whoppers about this, is that there are now more polar bears enjoying eating seals in the Arctic than there were when I was filming there some 30 years ago. Simply because the people the gamekeepers, if I may use that word, had said to the Inuit that don't just kill them willy-nilly, but you can have 1 license a year to kill one, and you can sell that nice license to an American for $60,000. So all of a sudden, the number of polar bears have gone up, and they've been going up ever since, whatever Al Gore and the boys say. Now, that was all due to good wildlife management, and it was so good that the global warmers did their best to lock out the lead expert on producing more or allowing more these bears to live. At an important meeting, they said, we don't want him there. Of course they don't, because it's wonderful. If you really want to get everyone behind us, we've got to stop global warming, because all the polar bears are dying. And that was a meeting that was discussing the whole matter of the number of polar bears and what Al Gore was telling us. A gory matter that had put the frighteners on our children, and children right the way across the world. Well, and I got lots and lots of letters saying, what are we going to do with the polar bears? Leave them there to get on with it. Again, not to be outdone, Ed Miliband helped fund, well, we, the taxpayers, really foot the bill, to a bedtime story replete with horrible monsters and drowning dogs and drowning children. How many of you actually saw that? It was running in prime time. And lots of us wrote to letters, but very, very few of those were actually published. This is right. You really shouldn't happen in Britain. And it's been happening in Britain by far too much. How did they get away with it? Well, how did Tony Blair get away with lots of things he used to say? And I'm a socialist. That's probably why I was thrown out of the BBC. I'm the last one left. So here we are. Sea levels have been slowly rising ever since 1850, because that was the end of the Little Ice Age. And up it's been going. They have it, but they've remained, since 1850, they've remained stationary. They've remained stationary since 2006, against the predictions. Predictions based on computer models with the real data highlight only contradictions. Look at the real data and it says the other thing, you look at their data and it tells lies, including the famous hockey stick, which is still waved at every occasion by Gore and his acolytes. Since 1990, the IPCC computer modelers have worked assiduously modelling where the Earth's temperature is supposedly going to. Nobody knows. Well, they don't know, but some people think they do know. And we can see just how accurate they are. And just up goes the blorlot, and down it comes. The actual temperature is falling pretty flatly. In fact, that 0.7 degree rise has now disappeared, or most of it has disappeared off the graphs. And if we look at it closer, you can see all these observational data. Up goes the hockey stick, down comes the real data. So again, gone. And we've been told so many times that that is not happening. So little wonder that the IPCC had silently dropped Gore's claims re the hockey stick from their reviews. And the only way that their predictions could change to going out would be to give a good dose of statistical Viagra to Al Gore. Following this change of heart, hard data on tree rings published in peer-reviewed scientific journals were recently released after a long and protracted fight over data access, where they had to be squeezed out from the Warner's Tower of Babel so we could get them into, or so the boys could get them into print. These have now been proved to have been subject to scandalous cherry picking in order to get the answers the global warmers want to publish, thus keeping the world scared of carbon dioxide, their reputation safe, finance for faster computers, for really that is the only thing they need to carry on their work, except even larger shredders to make sure they can chuck all the data they don't want people to see away. And also budgets well on the global warming gravy train. A research gravy train backed up by jet set travel to conferences in choice locations around the globe, each well laced with cordon bleu cuisine for the top tables and adulation from a regular caravanserai of hangers-on, swelling a spurious and unscientific census. Al Gore says that science is settled, and 2,500 IPCC scientists agree CO2 causes climate change. Well, not exactly. Of that 2,500 scientists who have submitted papers to the IPCC, only 600 looked at those involving CO2, so that cuts it down there. Of that 600, only 308 were a part of the second review process. Next slide, please. Of that 380, only 62 reviewed the last chapter, and that was the only chapter which looked at what to attribute the cause of climate change to. Of that 62, only 7 reviewers were independent, and of the magnificent 7 left, 2 did not agree with the final statement, which demanded they believed that there was a 90% certainty CO2 caused climate change. I mean, and that, people have been swallowing that for a long, long time. So the major statement of the multi-billion buck review saying what climate change was attributed to was only supported by just 5 independent scientists. On the other side of the hand, there are 36,000 independent scientists, and I'm one of them, who have signed a petition saying there is no conclusive evidence that CO2 causes climate change. Quod erat demonstrandum. Back to the real world of those tree rings, reviewed by real expert scientists, not puppets on very expensive strings. The scientists use only 12 carefully chosen tree ring sequences to prepare his story, omitting 34 that didn't suit his purpose. Shades of the millennium bugs, .com scandals, and dare I say it, the credit crunch. Scandals in which tens of thousands of highly paid computer literate people, lots lots of money and lots of kudos. So back to botany. I have spent over 50 years of my life talking to and about plants while doing my bit to recycle carbon dioxide. Is CO2 a pollutant? No, it's not. It is an odorless, colourless and non-toxic. We drink it in fizzy drinks and lager, and it puts the rise in our daily bread. And it is necessary for all life. We're all made of quite a lot of carbon. Photosynthesis converts CO2 into oxygen and carbon, the main building blocks of life. As long as the plants have sufficient water and nutrients, their growth is enhanced by rising concentrations of carbon dioxide. CO2 is the main free airborne fertilizer of the world, and if we shut it off, we've really had it. Many experiments show that up goes CO2 and then up goes the growth of the plants. Of course, you've got to have the water and you've got to have the nutrients there, but basically that is exactly what happens. And of course, there are plenty of farmers who use greenhouses, who use polytunnels, and inside there is more and more CO2, and they grow extremely well. And quite a lot actually burn fossil fuels to get the CO2 in there to fertilize their crops. And they're really green houses of recycled plastic. And much of China is now covered in those things. Remember, they were taking our waste, 90% or 60% of all our waste plastic, and they were turning them into these things and growing toadstools and all sorts of things in because there is more CO2. And there is our carbon dioxide plays a vital part in providing, and hold on to this number, the 18 billion meals that do their best to feed the growing number of people across the world every day. 18 billion. If there were no CO2, we'd all die of starvation. Cereals, fruits, legumes, root tubers, and that's what we feed on, and that's why we need CO2. Little wonder that the once starving people of parts of the Sahel and Sahara, do you remember, 30 years ago, people were dying in the Sahel, and thank goodness, the ones that didn't die are now back into their areas, which are now covered with trees, as far as you can actually see. And in the shade of the trees that now grow on some 300,000 square kilometres of their tribal lands, thanks to plants. Because as the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere goes up, all the plants can keep their little mouths, their stomata, closed, and therefore the trees can grow back again. And we now have got some of our scientists and some of our leading scientists going out to Africa and say, you must reduce your carbon footprint. They don't have a buddy and we're just trying to get hold of their resources. And it has got to stop. And already, because we are now seeing lots more land turned over to biodiesel, people are dying in their thousands because they have lost the land on which they used to produce their food. So this is all thanks in great part to the rising levels of carbon dioxide. The last thing Africa needs is to reduce its non-existent carbon footprint, whatever that is. Likewise, the last thing the economy of the world needs is to spend trillions of taxpayers' money, hard money, trying to solve the credit crunch by raising more taxes to win the non-existent carbon dioxide war. And do you remember, it wasn't very long ago that Mr. Brown turned round, he was going to do something to solve the credit crunch and the carbon crunch by building electric-driven cars in Britain. Where the hell does the electricity come from? You have to make it, and every time you change a fossil fuel or any fuel from one, you lose half of that thing. And he got away there. Everyone was saying, oh, how wonderful. We can have lots of millions of green jobs and we'll be flying about these damn stupid cars which have already produced quite a lot of CO2. If you're worried about it, I'm not, so there we go. And how many of you can remember Tom Lehrer? He was the Johnny Ball of America for a long time. And good advice in the words of Tom Lehrer: don't be scared, be prepared for anything natural climate change throws our way. And then we've really got no be prepared, but don't be scared of it because we can't stop it even if it's happening. Yes, that would cost a lot of money, and it would save lots of lives and create lots of worthwhile jobs, especially in those developing countries. Would you buy a second-hand private jet from the world's first carbon-neutral billionaire? And he is a billionaire and he's still making money. Sadly, Ed Miliband has been poking his nose into things he doesn't actually understand. Actually looks a bit better, like, doesn't he? He's been at it again with 2 doom and gloom adverts based on nursery rhymes aimed at our youngsters. And Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. I've never understood why they went to the top of the hill to get paid, but I wasn't a very good mathematician. I'll ask Johnny Ball. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. There was none as extreme weather due to climate change had caused a drought. What a load of codswallop, right? Now I really am very, very gutted in what I'm going to report this time, but it's been brewing for a long time. Nothing more tellingly reflects the Met Office's partnership with the global warmers is the fact that its present chairman is Robert Napier, a green activist who previously ran WWF UK, one of the most vociferous of the climate change lobby groups. Mr. Napier now helps run not only the Met Office, which has been part of the Ministry of Defence ever since its forecast came from the Air Ministry roof, but also an array of other bodies centrally involved in driving the political climate change agenda. Pandagate was waiting to be opened, and it now has been. It has emerged that one of WWF's latest massive schemes to preserve an enormous chunk of pristine forest was to allow the WWF and its partners to share the selling of carbon credits worth £60 billion. £60 billion. These will enable firms in the industrial world to carry on emitting CO2 just as before. The idea is that credits representing the CO2 locked into this particular area of jungle so remote that it is not under any threat at all, should be sold on the international market, allowing thousands of companies in the developed world to buy their way out of having to restrict their carbon emissions. We've heard it all before. The net effect would simply be to make the WWF and its partners, the World Bank, much richer while making no contribution to lowering overall CO2 emissions. Medieval indulgences in a new vest. The floodgates of truth are now open, and the scientists who played Russian roulette with our futures and those who fiddled when they found that the world was not burning. Take heart. Earth's climate has remained within limits tolerated by life for several billion years. During this time, the planet has experienced unimaginable volcanic events which liberated huge amounts of CO2. We have collided with extraterrestrial objects which triggered either increase or decrease of temperature. and even the energy flow from the sun has altered over such a span of geological time. And yet, here we are. Life remains, the global temperature is well within life's limit. Indeed, the present day is cooler than much of previous geological time. Don't be scared, be prepared.